He'll have Charles Cotton from the NRA sitting right next to him.
Oh, they testified on these things. Sure.
Anyway.
I'm very gracious. You know, it's a small sandbox, all the gun groups. We can all play
Richard
together.
doesn't like to offend. Me, on the other hand, I am hot to trot on offense. Let's go.
We are the Armed Attorneys. Today we're coming to you with a very important update on a bill that's headed to the desk of the governor. It relates to short-barreled firearms here in the Lone Star State. But before we begin, show your support for the Second Amendment by hitting that like button. And Texans, if you are interested in this stuff, head over to armedattorneys.com. About halfway down on the page, there's our newsletter. We're going to be giving lots of legislative updates on all kinds of things that are going on. We just published a huge long email about things that have already happened, things that are dead, things that we're still watching. So you want to be in the know, make sure to jump on that mailing list. Today we're talking about SB 1596 by Hagenbuch. I think that's how you say his name. Sorry.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You tell.
I've
How
been
do
saying
you
it
think?
wrong all year.
How do you think you say it?
Hagenbuch. That's what I've been saying all year. Sorry, Senator.
But this has to do with the decriminalization of short-barreled firearms under state law. So we've got two things going on here: state law, federal law. What is the current state of the law?
So weirdly, Texas tied, and I think a lot of states do this, tied what is an unlawful weapon, illegal weapon under the National Firearms Act to its own Texas Penal Code. So we had a mirror image, essentially, of the National Firearm Act saying, look, if you have any one of these items and the police in the state find that it has not been properly registered, well, guess what? You're not just in trouble with the federal government, you're in trouble with the state of Texas as well. This is incredibly common throughout the country. So what happened? Well, take yourself back a couple years to Biden's ATF deciding that arm braces were in fact not braces, but stocks that made AR pistols and the like into short barrel rifles. Everybody jumped through their hoops or not to be properly prepared for that. But then we had this problem, right? Which is that the state of Texas had to essentially follow that law, and a lot of people were going to get prosecuted.
Yeah, and it's a huge problem because, right, when you have state law contingent on federal law, and depending on what direction the wind is blowing in D.C. is going to change the law under state law. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
It created all kinds of enforcement issues, cops trying to make roadside determinations as to whether or not these things are legal or not legal. I had clients who had braced pistols who the police just weren't up to date on. Hey, look, because this was dynamic. The cases were moving fast.
Injunctions and holds and appeals.
And who does it apply to and all that stuff.
Yep.
And so, and I don't blame the cops because, they got a lot to keep up with, but they weren't a lot of times up to date with what was the legality of braces. Well, guess what? We're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We are not going to tie state law contingent to federal law anymore. And that's what this bill did. It just passed on the House floor. This is pretty breaking stuff. It's already passed out of the Senate, passed on the House floor. It's heading over to the governor's desk. And what does this bill, it really just does two big things.
Well, one, it brings light back into my heart that the Texas legislature is not so dysfunctional that it can't do anything, especially gun related, because this session was a huge disappointment. Yeah. Huge disappointment in a lot of ways, but particularly on guns. So it does lift my mood a little bit, but it is, in its essence, it's very, very simple. The best way to modify gun law in your state is not to actually modify the code in adding what you want the law to be. It's just by subtracting.
Yeah, these are infringements. We should be deleting them.
Strike them.
Yeah, so it removes our definition of what constituted a short-barreled firearm. These were rifles under 16 inches, shotguns under 18 inches. And then it removes the criminal penalty that used that definition. Hey, short-barreled firearms not, owned and possessed in compliance with the NFA. It deleted all that stuff. Kind of like what we did with suppressors a few sessions ago.
Right. So Texas's NFA list is getting shorter and shorter.
Yeah, and this is assuming the governor's going to sign it. I haven't heard anything about him not signing this.
I have not either. I trust him to sign this.
Well, and I went through the witness list on this. It didn't look like any police associations, sheriff's associations, any groups like that said, hey, we don't like this.
Yeah.
And that's usually who he's kind of taken his lead from on these types of bills.
Yes, Greg Abbott is, I will say, decidedly more pro Second Amendment when ERCOT has just killed a bunch of Texans, which was not the case this year. But
If you're not inside, I mean, if you're looking for that, the year that we got constitutional carry just so happened to coincide with the winter apocalypse of Texas, where we all lost power for a week.
the Texas power grid, that's effectively run by the muckety mucks in the state, let a bunch of people die. Because they were doing a piss poor job of running our power grid. And so to distract from that, he all of a sudden became really pro-gun. We got constitutional carry over.
I'll take it.
I mean, it literally cost lives, but also saved lives because it's
Yep.
constitutional carry and some more guns in the hands of good people. But yes, without said scandal to distract from, this is, in the long run, such a minor alteration. I trust him to sign it. I trust him.
Yeah, and
Don't let me down, Greg.
Yeah, we have a little bank of pro 2A legislation. It's not this giant session that we wanted, but there's some good stuff that is going to cross the finish line, and we're going to do recaps of all that stuff.
You think we got a half dozen good bills?
I bet we get a half dozen good bills.
I'll take. I'll take it.
Yeah, and in Greg Abbott fashion, I imagine he'll get all the 2A bills together, have a signing ceremony. Would love to see that happen. But all right,
With no one who actually did anything to help.
that's
He'll have Charles Cotton from the NRA sitting right next to him.
oh, they testified on these things. Sure.
Anyway,
I'm very gracious. It's a small sandbox. All the gun groups, we can all play.
Richard
together.
doesn't like to offend. Me, on the other hand, I am hot to trot on offense. Let's go.
So, all right, we get rid of this definition. We remove the criminal penalty. Now, this is just a state law. This doesn't affect anything on the federal level. We are watching what's
Yes.
going on with the budget, reconciliation in this, with the Senate and the House. Potentially, is the Short Act going to show up in that? Remove short-barreled rifles, shotguns from the National Firearms Act. It doesn't look like the odds are in our favor, but let's assume that short-barreled firearms stay where they are on the NFA. How does this interact with that?
It does not change that one bit. And so that's like a lot of the anti-gun rage coming out of this particular bill is built around the myth that short barrel rifles are just going to be legal all up and down the state of Texas now. And that's actually not true. Federal law still exists. And unfortunately, federal supremacy is still a thing, meaning if the FBI or the ATF wanted to swoop in and enforce federal law against you because you had an unregistered short barrel rifle that was illegal under the National Firearms Act because you did not jump through your hoops and pay the government its money and say, pretty please, daddy, I want permission to carry this, then you are still going to be in trouble under the federal law. It just means the state of Texas is not responsible for enforcing this particular firearms infringement. Period.
Yeah.
Period. It does not change nothing about federal law.
Well, and I'll say this will help a lot of folks because the vast majority of us, we never come into contact with federal authorities. And so, we aren't going to have state agents enforcing federal law. Can state agents, send this on to the Department of Justice and say, hey, guess what? We just found this short-barreled rifle. They can.
They're not supposed to under the Sanctuary Act,
right.
but they do still.
They do still. And I've actually submitted a second sidebar. I've submitted several Second Amendment sanctuary complaints.
I know you have. I forgot to follow up on where those went.
Nowhere. So, and the sole authority to handle those is our Attorney General. We'll see. Busy guy. But, theoretically, most of us only coming into contact with local, county and state police, this is going to be
Sure.
a huge
Sidebar, you know what would help you win John Cornyn's seat? Maybe a little pro-gun work, Ken
Yeah.
Paxton.
win. I think he's doing pretty good so far.
Let's get him there. I got some suggestions.
So will the governor sign? I would say very
Probably.
likely yes, but we'll monitor it. We'll let you know if anything changes. Assuming it gets signed, when would this go into effect?
Probably September 1st. I think that, gosh, I will say I did not see the version that passed the House floor yesterday, but I'm assuming that still said September 1st.
It does.
Okay, that's our standard. They got to write it in if they want it to be longer. They got to amend it on the floor if they want it to be longer. And Sounds like that did not happen. Richard actually watched the debate in the middle of the night live, so
Yeah, it was.
he knows. I
Yeah,
did not.
1:40 a.m. Oof. But we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you did, consider subscribing, hitting that like button, and help us fight the anti-2A algorithm by sharing this video.
And Texans, sign up for our newsletter. The first one went out last week. We're working hard. We want you to stay informed. Until next time, we're the Armed Attorneys.